Welcome to Snoozing Little Cloud. Here you will discover new stories, profound lessons, and fantastic adventures. If you like them, remember to support us by subscribing to the channel and activating the bell. Now make yourself comfortable, close your eyes, and let's begin the journey. Chapter 1. The Entrance. When Nikos set foot in the warehouse near the harbor, the sound of the sea remained outside, as if someone had closed an invisible door behind him. Inside, the air was heavy and still. It smelled of old wood, wet ropes, and smoke that never completely dissipated. It was a place that had seen many people come and go, and it seemed to remember them all. The men and women of the gang were already there. Some sat on weather-beaten crates, others stood leaning against the walls. They whispered quietly or remained silent. When Nikos entered, no one took a step toward him. Someone looked up for a moment, then looked down again. There were no smiles, no gestures of welcome, only brief, measured glances. Nikos took a few steps forward and stopped in the center of the room. He could feel his heart beating fast, but he tried to remain calm. He remembered well the choices that had brought him there. He had decided not to turn back, even though now, in that silence, he felt the full weight of that decision. The gang leader spoke without raising his voice. He said a few words, simple and direct. From that moment on, Nikos was part of the group. Nothing else, no promises, no long explanations. No one spoke of right or wrong. It was as if that choice was just a practical matter, a decision made because it had to be made. Afterwards, no one added anything else. The room filled with small noises again, a crate being moved, slow footsteps, a cough. People began to leave one by one without really saying goodbye. They didn't seem angry, but they didn't seem happy either. They just seemed tired. Nikos stood there still, not quite sure what to do. No one told him where to sit or what his job was. Finally, he approached an empty crate and sat down. He looked at the others' hands, large, marked, worn out by work. He looked at their faces, more serious than he had expected. At that moment, he realized that this gang was not made up of heroes, but of people who carried the weight of their choices. When he left the warehouse, the sound of the sea came back all at once. The waves hit the pier with a slow, steady rhythm. The sky was changing color, and the first lights of the harbor were reflected on the dark water. The boats swayed gently, tied together, unable to go far. Nikos walked alone along the pier. No one accompanied him. No one said, "See you tomorrow." Yet he knew that from that moment on, he was no longer just an observer. Even without having done anything, he felt that everything that would happen would also have his name on it. He stopped and looked at the sea. It didn't seem welcoming, but neither did it seem hostile. It was simply there, indifferent to everything. Nikos thought that joining the gang wasn't like finding a home. It was like stepping down a staircase without knowing how deep the darkness was beneath him. The wind ruffled his hair, carrying with it the smell of salt. At that moment, he understood something simple. Being part of something doesn't mean feeling protected. Sometimes it just means staying, even when you're not sure you've made the right choice. The sea continued to move as if nothing had changed. But for Nikos, everything had just begun to get heavy. Chapter 2. The Signs. The next day, Nikos returned to the harbor before the sun was fully up. The morning air was cold and crisp, and the sky was a dull color, as if it hadn't yet decided whether to become clear or remain gray. The harbor was slowly waking up, a few distant voices, the sound of ropes being pulled, footsteps echoing on the wooden piers. No one was waiting for him. Nikos stood still for a moment, looking around. He told himself that it was normal. He was new. He still had to understand how things worked. Yet, as he walked, he began to notice small details that gave him a strange feeling, difficult to explain. When he passed someone from the gang, conversation stopped. Voices became lower or changed topic. Some people barely looked at him as if they didn't want to be seen watching him. Others pretended not to notice him at all. No one was openly hostile, but no one was really friendly either. He was given a simple task to help move some crates near a smaller warehouse. No one explained what was inside them. No one told him why it was important. Nikos did what he was asked to do, silently, trying not to ask questions. As he worked, he listened, not out of curiosity, but because he felt he had to. The words that reached his ears were fragments, half-spoken names, unexplained places, sentences that ended too soon. It was like looking at an incomplete drawing, in which the most important pieces were always missing. At one point, he heard his name being said. It wasn't said aloud, but enough for him to understand that it wasn't a coincidence. When he looked up, the person who had spoken turned away. Nikos said nothing, but inside he felt a small knot tighten. During a break, he sat down on a crate and quickly ate what he had with him. Around him, the others did the same, but not together. Everyone was on their own. There was no laughter, no stories, only silence and quick bites as if there were never enough time. Nikos began to understand that this was how the gang worked, not with big speeches, but with unspoken habits. And he didn't know those habits yet. Every gesture he made seemed out of place, every word useless. In the afternoon, he saw a scene that struck him more than the others. A man from the gang, younger than he looked, was arguing quietly with the leader. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he understood that it wasn't a normal discussion. There was tension and fear in their movements, in their quick glances at each other. When the man left, his face was pale and his hands were clenched into fists. No one commented, no one asked for explanations. Nikos felt an uncomfortable feeling growing inside him. It wasn't real fear, but something similar. It was the realization that he was entering a world where not everything was said, and where understanding too quickly could be dangerous. As the sun began to set, the harbor changed again. Shadows spread, lights came on one after another. The sea seemed darker, deeper. Nikos walked slowly, observing the people moving as if they were following an intrinsic and shared rhythm. At that moment, he understood something important. He had not just joined a gang. He had entered into a fragile balance, made up of relationships and unwritten rules. Signal after signal, he realized that the meaning was the same, even if no one said it out loud. Not everyone was happy with his presence, and some were already studying and analyzing him. Nikos stopped for a moment, looking at the sea moving without caring about anything. He realized that the real danger was not what he didn't know yet, but what he was beginning to understand. And that awareness, more than anything else, made him feel suddenly much more alone. Chapter 3. The First Test. The evening arrived unnoticed. The sky above the harbor grew darker, as if someone had slowly turned off the light. Voices were lowered and movements became quicker. It was the moment when the band stopped looking like a group of tired workers and began to become something else. Nikos noticed it in the way people looked at each other. They didn't talk much, but they understood each other anyway. A nod of the head, a longer than normal glance was enough. He tried to imitate those gestures, but he knew he wasn't doing it right. It was like trying to follow music you couldn't really hear. The boss approached him when the port was almost empty. He didn't say his name. He just motioned with his hand, inviting him to follow him. Nikos felt a slight shiver run down his spine, but he didn't hesitate. He got up and walked behind him. They walked through narrow alleys, lit by a few flickering lights. The houses seemed taller and closer together, as if they wanted to close in above their heads. The air was humid and carried the smell of the sea, mixed with that of garbage and smoke. They stopped in front of a low, almost hidden door. The leader knocked twice, then a third time more slowly. The door opened just enough to let them in. Inside was a warehouse smaller than the one at the port, almost empty. In the center was a wooden crate. "Just look," said the leader. It was the first long sentence Nikos had heard from him. Two members of the gang approached the crate and opened it. Inside were simple items: dry food, blankets, small bags tied with string. Nothing valuable, nothing that looked like it had been stolen for its wealth. Nikos watched them in silence, trying to understand. "This stuff mustn't disappear," continued the leader. "It has to get where it's needed." Nikos nodded. He asked no questions. He understood that this was his test. Not a dangerous action, not a difficult choice, just the ability to keep quiet, to observe and not to make mistakes. They left the warehouse and split up. Nikos followed a woman from the gang, shorter than him, with a marked face and alert eyes. They walked quickly without stopping. They crossed streets that Nikos didn't know, areas of the city that seemed normal during the day, but became different, harsher at night. They arrived in front of a poor house with broken windows and a door that didn't close properly. The woman knocked softly. After a moment, the door opened. A hand took the bag without saying a word. The door closed immediately. Nikos felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't sadness, but it wasn't relief either. It was the feeling of doing something right in the wrong way, or perhaps something wrong for the right reason. He couldn't decide. They repeated the same thing several times. Different houses, different doors, always the same silence. No one thanked them. No one explained. It was as if everything had already been decided long ago. When they returned to the port, Nikos realized he was tired. Not in his body, but in his head. Each step seemed heavier than the previous one. He had seen little, done little, yet he felt he had crossed an invisible line. The woman stopped and looked him in the eyes for the first time. She didn't smile. "Don't talk about what you saw," she said. "Not even to yourself." Then she left, leaving him alone. Nikos stood still for a few seconds. He looked at his empty hands. He realized that this had been his first real test, not carrying the crates, but the weight of what he now knew. From that moment on, he was no longer just someone who helped out. He was someone who had seen too much to be able to turn back. The sea in the distance continued to move slowly, indifferent as always. But Nikos felt that step by step, he was getting deeper and deeper into something he could not ignore. And that night he understood another simple and terrible thing. Doing good does not make things easier. Sometimes it just makes them harder to bear. rain began without warning. It wasn't heavy, but it fell thickly, as if the sky were whispering something no one wanted to hear. Nikos walked behind the others along a narrow road, far from the main port. The stones under his feet were slippery, shiny with water and mud. No one spoke. All that could be heard were their footsteps, their breathing, and the distant sound of the waves. They hadn't been told where they were going. They had only been told to follow. Nikos understood that in this gang, explanations were as rare as smiles. You learned by trying, making mistakes, and remembering. They arrived in front of a low, windowless building. The door was made of iron, marked with deep scratches. The leader of the gang stopped and knocked 3 times, softly. After a few seconds, the door opened slightly. A faint light came from inside, yellow and flickering. Inside was an empty, almost bare room. In the center was a wooden table. On top of it was only a lit lantern. Nikos entered last. When the door closed behind him, he felt that sensation again, as if the outside world had remained distant, unreachable. The leader spoke again. He did not raise his voice. He said that night there would be no action, but teaching. He said that before doing anything, one had to understand how to do it, and above all, when to stop. He didn't talk about laws. He didn't talk about punishment. He talked about consequences. He told stories about people who thought they were smarter than others, about those who had taken too much, about those who hadn't listened. Each story was short, but it left a weight in the air. No names, no unnecessary details, just the essential facts, like sharp blows. Nikos listened in silence. He understood that this gang had no written rules because it didn't need them. The rules lived in memories, in mistakes already made, in heavy silences that no one wanted to repeat. At one point, the leader looked at Nikos, not harshly but attentively. He asked him if he understood. Nikos nodded. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He understood that even words, in there, had to be used with caution. The other members of the gang moved along the walls. Some crossed their arms, others lowered their gaze. No one seemed happy to be there, but no one left. It was as if everyone knew that this moment was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable. The leader concluded by saying something simple. Being part of the group did not mean being invisible. Every choice left a trace, and sooner or later that trace came back. When they left the building, the rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. Nikos took a deep breath. He felt tired, even though he had not done anything. It was a new kind of tiredness, one that didn't come from his body but from his head. They walked together again for a while, then parted without saying goodbye. Each went in a different direction, as if it were important not to be noticed. Nikos stood still for a moment under a street light that wasn't working. He looked at his hands. They were the same as always, but they seemed heavier. He realized that he hadn't joined a gang to feel strong. He had entered a place where every mistake was costly, even those made in silence. He started walking again. He knew that those unwritten rules would follow him everywhere, and that the real problem would not be remembering them, but accepting them when the most difficult moment came. Chapter 5. What is lost by staying night fell silently. There was no specific moment when the day ended. The light simply faded, as if someone had turned it off quietly, so as not to be noticed. The port changed its appearance. Voices became rarer, footsteps faster. doesn't bleed. Inside, the house was dark. He turned on a small lamp, the one he used when he didn't want to light up the whole room. Shadows stretched across the walls. Everything seemed to be in its place, yet it felt as if nothing was really the same as before. He sat down on the bed without taking off his shoes. He stared at the floor as if he could find an answer among the cracks. He thought about how easy it was to get into something and how difficult it was to get out. No one had said, "Now you are one of us," with proud words. It had all been simple, almost trivial, and that was precisely what made it dangerous. The biggest things, he realized, don't come with noise. They come in silence. Outside, the sea continued to move. Indifferent as always, Nikos imagined the waves breaking against the pier, one after the other, without ever stopping. He thought that maybe people become like that too. They keep going, even when something inside has already broken. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. Every time he tried to relax, that feeling returned to his chest like a light but constant weight. He understood that being part of the gang didn't just mean doing something. It meant becoming a new person, or rather, being reborn. At that moment in the darkness of the room, Nikos understood a simple and harsh truth. Sometimes you don't lose something by making the wrong choice. Sometimes you lose something even by standing by and watching day after day without noticing or doing anything. The sea continued to move, and he, without knowing it, had already begun to move with it. Chapter 6. The First Assignment. The morning arrived without light. The sky above the harbor was covered with low, gray clouds, so dense that they seemed to want to crush the water below them. Nikos woke up before the sound of the boats. He hadn't really slept. He had just closed his eyes and let time pass, listening to the sea and the distant footsteps of someone walking on the pier. When he got up, his body felt heavy, not from tiredness but from anticipation. He knew something was going to happen that day. He didn't know what or when, but he was sure he wouldn't be left in peace for much longer. He walked slowly to the warehouse. The door was ajar. Inside, the light was dim, but different from the day before. It wasn't silent. There were low voices, slow movements, the sound of objects being moved carefully. No one spoke loudly. It was as if the place itself demanded that they remain calm. One of the men saw him enter and nodded to him. Not a greeting, just a signal. Nikos approached and stood waiting. The leader of the gang arrived shortly after. He did not say his name. There was no need. Everyone stopped talking when he was in the center of the room. "Today you listen," he said. "You don't ask unnecessary questions. You watch and learn." Nikos nodded. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he didn't look down. The task was simple, at least in words. They had to retrieve a crate from the east side of the port before it was loaded onto a boat. There was no need to run or use force. Just be there. Just show up at the right time. They walked together in silence. The port seemed bigger than usual. Every step echoed on the wet wooden planks. Nikos observed everything, the hands gripping the ropes, the glances checking the corners, the way no one ever left their flank exposed. When they reached the crate, nothing sudden happened. No fighting, no running. One man spoke to another, a few short sentences. Then the crate changed direction. It was moved. That was all, nothing more. Yet Nikos clearly felt that this was the moment when he had stopped being just a spectator. He hadn't touched anything, he hadn't spoken, but he had been there, and that was enough. On the way back, the sea was darker. The wind had picked up. No one commented on the operation. No one said whether it had gone well or badly. When they returned to the warehouse, everyone resumed their places as if nothing had happened. Before leaving, the boss approached Nikos. "Now you know how it works," he said. "From here on, it gets harder." Nikos stood still. He didn't answer. When he was alone again, he realized that the weight he felt was not fear. It was responsibility, and he knew that, from that moment on, it would grow. Chapter 7. The Ancient Fire. That night, the harbor seemed to hold its breath. The sea was dark and slow, and the waves hit the pier with a deep sound, different from usual. Nikos noticed it immediately. It wasn't the quiet sound of water. It was like a warning. The air in the warehouse was tense. No one really spoke. Some arranged ropes, others checked crates closed with large nails. Everything was done quickly, but quietly. Then it happened. A distant cry broke the silence. Immediately afterwards, an orange light illuminated the walls of the warehouse, flickering like a living shadow. Nikos turned abruptly toward the exit. Outside, a boat was burning. The flames rose slowly but steadily, fueled by the pitch smeared on the wood and the oil stored in the amphorae. The fire did not explode, it advanced, it spread, it ate the wood as if it had known it all along. "Fire!" someone shouted. People ran toward the pier. Some looked for buckets of water. Others tried to untie the ropes that tied the boats together. But the ropes were thick, treated with grease and tar. They burned quickly. One boat suddenly broke loose and crashed into another. The flames passed easily from one to the other, as if they had been waiting for that moment. The harbor was filled with chaos, screams, footsteps, confused orders. Nikos could feel the heat on his skin, even from a distance. The smoke entered his lungs and made his eyes water. He coughed but continued to move forward. Then a deafening noise shook the pier. A pile of oil amphorae fell into the water. Some broke on the wood, and the fire suddenly grew stronger. The flames rose high, bending in the night wind. Part of the pier collapsed. The wood, already old and worn by the sea, could not withstand the heat. With a long creak, some planks broke and fell into the water. A tilted boat began to sink slowly, still engulfed in flames. Nikos stood still for a moment, paralyzed. Then he saw a man fall near the edge of the pier. He had become entangled between a rope and a crate. The fire was getting closer. Nikos didn't think about the rules. He didn't think about the gang. He moved. He grabbed a blade that had fallen to the ground and cut the rope with all his strength. The wood was hot, almost painful to touch. He managed to free the man and dragged him away, while behind them the flames devoured everything. When they got away, they both collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. The fire continued to burn for a long time, but eventually it began to die down, as tired as the people who had fought it. The harbor was no longer the same. Boats were destroyed, goods were lost, parts of the pier were broken. The air smelled of smoke, burnt wood, and the sea. The gang leader watched in silence. His face was dark, marked by ash. When he spoke, his voice was low and harsh. This fire did not start on its own. Nikos felt a shiver. Someone brought the pitch. Someone left the oil uncovered. Someone wanted the harbor to burn. Meanwhile, the sea had returned to calm, indifferent. Nikos looked at it and realized that that night had not only destroyed boats and wood, it had broken something invisible: trust, security, the idea that the worst was already over. From that moment on, he knew that the gang would no longer just look at the sea. They would start looking over their shoulders, and the darkness now seemed much closer. Chapter 8. The Crack. The morning after the fire, the harbor looked like a wounded place. The smoke was gone, but the smell of burnt wood lingered in the air. Blackened boats floated slowly, some poorly tied, others tilted like tired animals. The pier had missing parts, dark holes where solid planks had once been. The gang gathered again in the warehouse. No one spoke loudly. No one joked. Eyes moved more than mouths. It was as if everyone was watching everyone else. Nikos could feel it clearly. Something had broken. The boss wasn't in the center, like the first time. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He let the silence do its work. It was an uncomfortable silence, one that made you want to move, to talk, to make a mistake. The fire was no accident, he finally said, and it didn't come from outside. Those words weighed more heavily than the flames of the night before. Someone looked down. Someone else clenched their fists. A woman took a step back, almost without realizing it. Nikos watched. He remembered the crates he had seen the night before. The amphorae left too close to the edge. The ropes treated with more pitch than necessary. At the time, it hadn't seemed strange to him. Now it did. Whoever did this, the chief continued, knew the port, knew the timings, and knew where to strike. No one answered. The silence stretched on until a man spoke. His voice was thin, as if he wasn't used to using it in front of others. "Maybe," he said, "maybe someone just made a mistake." The boss looked at him, not with anger, with attention. "Mistakes leave confusing marks," he replied. "This fire was precise." A murmur ran through the group. Nikos felt something tighten in his stomach. For the first time since he had joined the gang, he was more afraid of people than of the sea. Then something seemingly insignificant happened, but it was decisive. A boy, slightly older than Nikos, made his way towards the exit. Slowly, he tried not to be noticed, but in the silence, every step sounded like a blow. The leader spoke without turning around. "Where are you going?" The boy stopped. He didn't answer right away. "To get some air," he finally said. The leader detached himself from the wall and took a step forward. Just one, but it was enough. "You can get air later," he said. "Now you stay." The boy swallowed. His hands were shaking. Nikos saw it clearly, and in that moment he understood. He had no proof. He had no certainties. But he understood. Betrayal wasn't always a strong, loud choice. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was a silent agreement. Sometimes it was someone thinking they could save themselves. The boss nodded to two people in the gang. They approached the boy and stood on either side of him. They didn't touch him. There was no need. "No one will talk," said the leader, addressing everyone. "Not today." Then he looked at Nikos. Just for a moment. That look made him understand something important. From that moment on, he too was part of the problem. He could no longer remain invisible. The boy was taken away through a door that Nikos had never noticed before. There were no screams. There was no sound. And that was what was most frightening. When the meeting ended, people left one by one. No one said goodbye. No one really looked each other in the eye. Nikos stayed behind. He felt that the betrayal was not over. It had only just begun. like a crack in wood, small at first, then wider and wider, until everything gives way and the crack becomes irreparable. He left the warehouse and looked at the harbor. The sea was calm, too calm it was almost disturbing. And for the first time he thought that the greatest danger did not come from water or fire, but from the people who walked beside him every day. Chapter 9. The Hidden Threads. Nikos didn't sleep that night. Every noise seemed louder than normal. The wind blowing through the boards of the harbor, distant footsteps, the wood creaking under the weight of the boats. Everything reminded him that the gang was no longer united. Perhaps it never really had been. At dawn, someone knocked on the door of the warehouse where Nikos was arranging some crates. It wasn't a loud knock, it was short and decisive. The boss entered without waiting for a reply. "Come with me," he said. He said nothing else. They crossed the harbor in silence, passing by the blackened remains of the fire. They arrived at a low building, almost hidden behind a row of nets hung out to dry. Nikos had never been inside before. Inside, the air was cold. The boy from the night before was sitting on a stool. His face was tired, his eyes red. He didn't seem injured. He seemed empty. The boss stopped in front of him. "I won't ask you why," he said. "Tell me who." The boy looked up slowly. His lips were trembling. "I wasn't alone," he said finally. "I couldn't have done it alone." Nikos felt a weight descend into his stomach. The boy explained everything in broken sentences, as if speaking were difficult. He said someone had promised him protection, that someone had told him the gang was about to fall, that it was better to choose sides in advance. "They told me the fire wouldn't hurt anyone," he whispered. "Just fear, just a warning." The boss's expression didn't change. "Who?" he repeated. The boy closed his eyes. "It was one of our own," he said. "Someone you all listened to." The silence became heavy. Nikos understood something important at that moment. The betrayal had not come from below, but from higher up. Someone who had a voice, someone who made decisions. The name was spoken softly, so softly that it almost seemed to disappear into the air. But Nikos heard it clearly. He was a man who had always spoken little, always present, always reliable. One of those whom no one would ever have suspected. The boss nodded slowly. "And what did he want?" he asked. "Control," replied the boy. "He wanted to weaken the gang, make us fight, make us afraid. That way it would be easier to lead those who remained." Nikos felt a shiver. It wasn't just anger, it was a plan. The fire wasn't meant to destroy the port. It was meant to break trust. The boss took a step back. He looked at Nikos. "Now you know," he said. "And when you know, you're no longer outside." Nikos nodded. He didn't know whether to be proud or scared. The boy was taken away. This time he asked no questions. He seemed relieved, as if telling the truth had been the last thing he could do. On his way out, Nikos saw the man mentioned earlier talking to other members of the gang. He was laughing softly, calmly, as if nothing had happened. And he realized that the real danger was not those who betrayed out of fear, but those who betrayed calmly. The port was slowly waking up. The boats moved lightly on the water. Everything seemed normal. But Nikos knew that beneath that calm there were invisible strings. Strings pulled by someone who had not yet shown his true face. And the worst thing was this. The betrayal had been discovered, yes, but it was not over yet. Chapter 10. The Step That Cannot Be Undone. The boss said nothing when they were alone. his head. "Because you didn't look down," said the man. "Everyone else does, sooner or later." He got up slowly and walked toward a side door in the warehouse. He opened it. Behind it was a small room, lit by a single oil lamp. Inside was the man, the one who had laughed at the port, the one no one would ever suspect. He was tied to a chair. He didn't seem injured. He wasn't shouting. He stared ahead with a hard, almost bored expression. When he saw Nikos, he smiled slightly. "So they chose you," he said. "Interesting." The boss closed the door behind them. "Talk," he said to the man. The man sighed. "I did what was necessary," he said. "The gang was weak. Too many doubts, too much fear. The fire showed who was ready and who wasn't." Nikos felt something rise inside him. It wasn't anger. It was disgust. "Did anyone die?" he asked. The man looked at him. "This is the sea," he replied. "Someone always dies." The boss turned to Nikos. "We can't let him go," he said. "But if I make him disappear, he becomes a martyr. If you do it, it becomes a choice." Nikos understood. They weren't asking him to strike. They were asking him to decide. The boss placed a knife in his hand. It wasn't big. It wasn't dirty. It was simple. "You don't have to use it," he said. "You just have to choose what happens to this man." The traitor laughed softly. "If you let me live, someone will help you," he said. "If you make me disappear, others will come looking for you. Either way, there's no going back." Nikos looked at the knife, then at the man, then at the boss. He thought of the burning harbor, the destroyed boats, the fear in the eyes of the people. He understood something that no one had ever told him. There are no clean choices. There are only choices that follow you. He put the knife on the table. "I won't kill him," he said. The traitor smiled more broadly. "But I won't free him," Nikos added. "And I won't protect him." The boss remained silent. "We'll hand him over," Nikos continued. "Not to those who want him dead, to those who will make him talk, to those who will destroy his voice, not his body." The man's smile faded. "Do you know what you're doing?" he growled. Nikos looked him in the eye. "Yes," he said. "I'm choosing who I become." The boss nodded slowly. "From today," he said, "whatever happens because of this man will also happen to you." Nikos felt the weight of those words like a stone on his chest. When he left the warehouse, the sky was gray. The sea was calm. Everything seemed normal. But he didn't. He had made his first irreversible choice. He hadn't shed blood. Yet something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer just a follower. Now he was a decision maker. And decisions, once made, never ask permission to come back to the surface. Chapter 11. Eyes on him. From the next day onwards, something changed. No one said anything to Nikos, and that was precisely the problem. In the warehouse, voices were lowered when he entered. Sentences were left unfinished. Glances lasted a second too long. No one accused him openly, but no one treated him as they had before. It was as if his choice had left a visible mark, even if invisible. Nikos felt it on him like a weight on his shoulders. The boss didn't defend him. He didn't call him back. He didn't explain it to the others. He left him there in the middle of the gang, like an unanswered question. And questions, when they find no words, become suspicions. One evening, while they were arranging crates near the pier, one of the men spoke to him without looking at him. "You decided for everyone," he said. Nikos continued working. I decided for myself," he replied. The man laughed softly, but it was not a cheerful laugh. "There is no for myself here," he said. "Every choice weighs on everyone." Another approached, then another. They didn't actually surround him, but the space around him grew tighter. No one touched him, no one shouted. It was a silent pressure like water slowly rising. "If he talks," said one voice. "If he doesn't talk," said another. Nikos understood that whatever happened, it would also be his fault. In the days that followed, they gave him the worst tasks, long solitary jobs, far away from the others. It wasn't an official punishment, it was a test. They wanted to see if he would resist, if he would make a mistake, if he would give in. He slept little at night. Every noise woke him up. Every step outside the warehouse seemed too close. But he didn't ask for help. He didn't make excuses. He continued to do what he had to do. One afternoon, he found one of the ropes badly cut. It wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted to see what he would do. Nikos replaced it without saying anything. He tied the knot carefully. Then he sat down and waited. When the boss arrived, he looked at the rope. Then he looked at Nikos. "You could have said something," he said. "There was no need," Nikos replied. The boss stared at him for a long time. "Do you know what they fear?" he asked. "That you might decide again." Nikos looked down. "I fear the opposite," he said. "That one day no one will decide anymore." The boss didn't answer. Then he walked away. That evening, as the sun set and the sea turned dark, Nikos understood something simple and harsh. It's not enough to make the right choice. You have to bear the weight of it, even when everyone looks at you as if you were a mistake. The gang hadn't kicked him out, but they hadn't accepted him either. He was stuck in the middle. And being in the middle is sometimes the most dangerous place of all. Chapter 12. The Wrong Name. The accusation came without a sound. It wasn't spoken aloud, at least not at first. It crept in like a rumor passed from mouth to mouth, changing shape with each passage. A softly spoken phrase, a lingering glance, an unnecessary pause when Nikos entered the room. At first, no one said his name, but everyone was thinking of him. Something had happened during the night. A box had disappeared. Not just any box. Inside were maps, signals, notes that only a few people knew about. Stuff that wasn't supposed to leave the warehouse. Stuff that, in the wrong hands, could do enormous damage. The gang gathered at dawn. Nikos was the last to enter. No one made room for him. He had to stop near the door. The air was colder than usual, or perhaps it was just the tension that made it so. The boss spoke calmly. "Someone has been talking," he said, "and someone has taken what they shouldn't have." No one answered. "I'm not accusing anyone," he continued, "but someone here knows more than they're saying." The eyes began to move, one after another. They all ended up on Nikos, not together, not openly, but clearly enough. "Was it him?" asked a voice. Nikos took a step forward. "No." The word fell heavily, but it wasn't enough. "You were alone last night," said another. "You've only just arrived," added someone behind him. "You've already made a choice that has put everyone at risk," said a woman without anger, only with weariness. Every sentence seemed logical, and that's why it hurt even more. Nikos tried to explain. He said where he had been, what he had done, who he had seen. But every answer seemed to open up another question. Every detail became suspicious. "You talk too much," said one. "Or too little," said another. The boss listened in silence. At one point, he raised his hand. Enough. He turned to Nikos. I have no proof, he said, but I have a responsibility. Nikos understood immediately what that meant. In the gang, the truth was not always a matter of facts. Sometimes it was a matter of balance. And at that moment, the balance was tipped against him. Until we figure out who betrayed us, the boss continued, you remain under surveillance. He didn't say guilty, but he didn't say innocent either. From that moment on, Nikos was no longer free to move around on his own. Someone was always following him. Someone was watching him even when he ate, when he worked, when he stopped to look at the sea. They didn't beat him. They didn't lock him up. They kept him there, in plain sight. The worst thing was the silence. The people he had talked to in the previous days now avoided him. Others looked at him as one looks at something that could break at any moment. One evening, while he was fixing some nets near the pier, one of the younger ones approached him. I don't think it was you, he said quietly. Nikos looked at him. Then why don't you say so? He asked. The boy looked down. Because what you believe doesn't matter here, he replied. What matters is what is convenient. Those words stayed with Nikos more than any accusation. That night, sitting alone, he realized something terrible. Being accused unfairly is not just about suffering a mistake. It's about discovering how little it takes for others to stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a problem. And the problem in the gang had to be solved. Outside, the sea continued to move as always, indifferent. But Nikos felt that soon someone would demand a definitive answer, and he knew that whether the accusation was true or false, one choice would destroy him either way. Chapter 13. The Man Who Never Looked Anyone in the Eye. The real culprit never spoke when everyone else was talking. That was what made him invisible. His name was Marek. He wasn't the strongest in the gang, nor the most respected. He didn't command or give orders. He always did the jobs that no one else wanted to do. Carrying crates, fixing broken nets, cleaning up after the others. He was always there, but never at the center of attention. Above all, he never looked anyone in the eye for too long. Nikos only noticed this after the accusation. He hadn't noticed it before. Marek was one of those people who left no trace in the memory. But now, forced to observe everything, Nikos began to notice the little things. Marek didn't stare at him like the others. He didn't avoid him. He didn't defend him. He studied him. During meetings, Marek kept his head down. He seemed to be listening, but every now and then his eyes would shift to the gang leader, as if to gauge the right moment. He never spoke first. He only spoke when he was sure his words would not attract attention. One day, while Nikos was on guard near the warehouse, he saw Marek coming out of a side room. His hands were dirty with dry dust, not salt, not wood, old dust, like the kind that remains on sheets of paper left untouched for too long. Maps, Nikos understood without needing proof. The stolen maps had not been taken in a hurry. Someone had had time. Someone knew exactly where to look. That night, Nikos did not sleep. He thought back to all the times Marek had been nearby without being noticed, to when he had asked questions that seemed innocent, to when he had listened to conversations that were none of his business, to when, shortly before the crates disappeared, he had insisted on staying alone in the warehouse to tidy up. Nikos Nikos realized something else, something even harder to accept. Marek hadn't acted alone. Someone had helped him, not directly. No one had told him to do it, but someone had let it happen. They had turned a blind eye. They had moved a guard. They had pretended not to see. The betrayal had not been a single blow. It had been a sum of small weaknesses. The next day, the gang met again. The boss was more tense. The pressure was mounting. Someone had to pay, and soon. If the truth doesn't come out by tomorrow, said the boss, we'll make a final decision. Everyone understood what that meant. Nikos looked at Marek. For a moment, their eyes met. Marek smiled. Not a big smile, just a small movement of his lips. That look said it all. The certainty of someone who knows they have shifted the burden onto someone else. The calmness of someone who is convinced that the group will do the dirty work for them. Nikos felt anger rising, but he kept it inside. Shouting would not help. Accusing without evidence would only make it worse. He realized that the truth alone was not enough. He had to choose. He could remain silent and hope that Marek was wrong, or he could speak up, accuse, and risk dragging down those who had helped him, people who were perhaps not bad, just weak. Whatever choice he made, someone would pay. And this time Nikos knew one thing for sure. The gang wasn't looking for the culprit. They were looking for peace, even if it was built on a lie. And Marek, in the shadows, still didn't look anyone in the eye. Chapter 14. The hands that opened the door. Nikos understood who had helped Marek without needing to hear it said aloud. He understood it from the way the silence changed. It wasn't the normal silence of the gang, the silence born of habit and weariness. It was a more attentive, more tense silence, which always came at the same moment, when someone spoke of order, of balance, of what was really needed. The name that kept coming up, even if never spoken openly, was Irene. Irene was one of the oldest men in the group. He wasn't in charge, but people listened to him. He spoke little, calmly, and when he did, he always seemed to know what the right choice was. He said that the gang had to stay united, that problems had to be solved quickly, that there was no time for doubts. Nikos remembered one particular evening. Shortly before the fire, Irene had changed the guard shifts. He had given no explanation, and no one had asked for one. He had sent 2 men away from the warehouse and said they were not needed. He had left one door unguarded, just one, saying there was no danger. That door had not been forced open. It had been opened. Marek could never have done what he did on his own. He didn't have the authority, he didn't have access, he didn't have the respect of the others. But Irene did. Irene could decide who stayed where, who came in, who went out. He could make even what wasn't normal seem normal. The betrayal had not been a violent act, it had been a permission given in silence. When Nikos realized this, he felt a strange sensation. Not anger, not hatred, disappointment. Irene didn't seem like a bad person. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. But he had made a simple choice, to let someone else make a mistake in order to keep the group calm. During the meeting, Nikos spoke. He didn't make any immediate accusations. He didn't name names. He recounted what he had seen, the changed shifts, the door left open, the way Marek always seemed to know where to go, the things said in hushed tones, never in front of everyone. Then he stopped. He looked at Irene. "You knew," he said. He didn't say it angrily. He said it as one says a painful truth. Irene remained silent for a long time. wasn't harsh. It was tired. I thought I could control the situation, she said. And that was her fault. She had seen the risk and decided not to stop it. She had thought that the end was more important than the means, that someone could be sacrificed for the good of all. The gang understood. No further explanation was needed. Marek tried to speak, but no one listened to him. Not because he had been exposed, but because he no longer mattered. Irene looked down. For the first time, she had no words to say. The gang leader looked at everyone in silence. "This is not just a mistake," he finally said. "It's a choice." Nikos felt the weight of those words. He understood that the real betrayal was not stealing or lying. It was thinking that order was more important than truth. When the meeting ended, nothing seemed resolved. But something had changed. People looked at each other differently, with less confidence, with more fear. Nikos left the warehouse and stopped to look at the sea. He had told the truth, but the truth had not brought peace. He understood that growing up in that place meant learning a difficult lesson. Not all enemies shout. Some speak softly. Some tell you they are doing it for the good of everyone, while opening doors that should not be opened. The sea was calm, as always, but Nikos knew that beneath that tranquil surface, the gang was changing forever. Chapter 15. The Weight That Remains. After that night, nothing was ever really the same for Nikos. It didn't happen all at once. There were no screams, no immediate punishment. It was something slower and quieter. Like when a crack appears in a wall. At first it seems small, but you know it won't go away. Nikos noticed it in the days that followed. The people in the gang continued to talk to him, but differently. Some looked at him longer than necessary. Others looked away. No one confronted him openly, but everyone knew that he was the one who had told the truth. And telling the truth came at a price. Nikos realized he had become uncomfortable, not because he had lied, but because he had upset the balance. He had shown that even those who seemed right could be wrong, and that was frightening. He was given jobs without explanation. Sometimes the heaviest ones, sometimes the useless ones. It wasn't a clear punishment, but a distancing, as if the gang was trying to figure out whether to trust him again or keep him on the sidelines. Even the boss spoke little to Nikos. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't close either. He seemed to be observing, as if he were waiting to see what kind of person he would become. One evening, Nikos found himself alone in the warehouse, stacking empty crates. His hands hurt, his back was tired. He paused for a moment and realized he was thinking about something simple. It would have been easier to keep quiet. That idea struck him hard. He realized that the hardest choice had not been to accuse Irene. It was to continue to believe that it had been the right choice, because now he carried the burden all by himself. No one thanked him. No one said, "You did the right thing." Yet, deep down, Nikos felt that turning back would not be possible. Not after seeing what happens when silence becomes an excuse. Even his view of the gang had changed. He no longer saw them as a close-knit group. He saw the fears, the doubts, the little lies that each of them told themselves in order to keep going. One night, sitting outside the warehouse, Nikos wondered if belonging to that group really meant being part of something, or if sometimes it just meant accepting that you were alone even when surrounded by others. The wind came in from the sea, cold and steady. The lights of the harbor flickered on the dark On the day when everything seemed to come to a standstill, nothing special happened. There were no meetings, no decisions announced aloud. The gang continued to move as usual between the port and the warehouse, as if time had decided to pass without asking questions. Yet Nikos felt that something had ended. Marek was gone. Irene no longer spoke as she had before. The boss watched in silence. The gang still existed, but it was no longer the same. Like a boat repaired after a storm, standing, yes, but scarred. Nikos often walked alone along the pier, not because he had been cast out, but because he felt the need to. He watched the boats rock gently on the water and thought about everything that had happened since he first set foot in that warehouse. Back then, he believed that joining the gang meant finding a place. Now he knew it meant taking on a burden. He had seen betrayal. He had seen fear. He had seen good people choose the wrong path for convenience, and he had seen himself change. One evening, the boss approached him as the sun set behind the harbor. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. "You did what you could," he said simply. Nikos nodded, but inside he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had made a choice, yes, and that choice had come at a cost. For him, for the others, for the whole gang. "Will you stay?" asked the boss without looking at him. Nikos didn't answer right away. He looked at the sea. It wasn't calm, it wasn't rough. It was just there, as always, indifferent to the decisions of men. "I don't know," he said finally. And it was a sincere answer. He realized he didn't need to decide right then. The saga of the gang, as he had known it, was over. That story of fire, betrayal, and silence had ended with him standing, still able to choose. Maybe he would stay. Maybe one day he would leave. But he would no longer be dragged along by events. He would no longer lower his eyes. Whichever path he took, it would be his own. Nikos stayed on the pier until the sky grew dark. The lights of the harbor came on one by one, reflecting on the water. The sea continued to move as it always had, before him and after him. The band didn't know what it would become. He didn't know what he would become. But one thing was certain. The story that had brought him there was over, and whatever came next would not be an escape, nor a promise. It would be a choice. The sea remained, and Nikos, for the first time, was no longer afraid to look at it. That's all for today's story. If you enjoyed it and would like to hear more, please like and subscribe to the channel. Now, take a deep breath and relax. Good night.